Hello, Naomi Shafra. Happy Sunday. More updates on sports and coronavirus. The UEFA urged the European leagues not to cancel their football season, and they are hoping that the football season will start in July. Belgium Pro League recommended their season to end by the Sport of Directors, and today I'll be bringing you on the updates of what ESPN captured in that meeting.
Hello and welcome into the latest edition of ESPN FC. I'm Dan Thomas. Later on in the show, Sid Lowe, Ali Moreno and Julian Laurent will be joining me. But we start, as we always do, bring you up to date with how the world of football is being affected by the coronavirus. Some concerning news coming out of Turkey is the former international goalkeeper Rasu Rekbar is in critical condition. That's after testing positive for the virus. Meanwhile, in England, Newcastle put all non-first team staff on furlough. Spurs have cut all 550 non-playing staff wages by 20% as they've been put on furlough where appropriate. Meanwhile, UEFA to discuss the future of this season's Champions League on Wednesday. And it's there that I want to start with Julian Laurent. This is a very significant meeting, isn't it, on Wednesday, Jules?
You're right, Dan. It's a big one on Wednesday via video conference call, obviously, with UEFA and the 55 federations, because first and foremost, they will talk about the future of the season Champions League and Europa League, as you mentioned, with UEFA presenting in a way the three plans that they have, A, B and C, for what could be the rest of the Champions League and the Europa League, depending on when we will be able again to play football, when we will finally get the green lights to resume the seasons. And it will all obviously depend on those days. It could be mid-May, it could be end of May, it could be end of June. They will present that, but I think Alexander Seferin as well, the UEFA president, will also remind everyone that we'll have to be ready, to be prepared, that maybe they might not be able to play any football between now and the end of June. And in that case, maybe, like he mentioned it at the weekend in an interview, we will have to start to think about the fact that this season could be finished, that this season could be over, that we might not be able to finish and resume the current season like everybody wants. And then in that case, a decision will have to be made on what we do with the season. Do we void it? Do we take the last game and say that that's the end of the season and take it from there? So this will be very important. Also, they will mention with each different federation what they will do, what they have in mind for their domestic leagues and how they can see their domestic league being finished. And also the very important questions of players' contract, what would happen to players on loan, what would happen to players whose contract finish on June the 30th, and also obviously financial fair play with the big loss of earnings that clubs are suffering at the moment.
Why is the end of June so significant? Why can't they just say, because look, May it's not going to happen. You know, that's clear when you take a look at what's going on around Europe. And it's very unlikely, you feel, that anything will get done until late summer. Why is June the 30th so important? Why can't they just extend that and say, look, when we're back, and then we'll play it out over 4 or 5 weeks? Why does it have to be all done and dusted by June the 30th? Is it just the player contracts? Because surely if it is, everyone can get on the same page, can't they, and say, right, we will make this work, we will get this done. We don't need to avoid it if we kind of organise this all in the right way.
So yes, I think ideally the date of June the 30th is very symbolic for that, mostly for the players' contract. Like we said, a lot of them will be out of contract with the current clubs. A lot of players, I think it's a third of Serie A players and third of La Liga players who are either out of contract in the summer on June the 30th or where the loan finishes it on June the 30th. So that's the first thing. I think also practically for UEFA and for the European competition, that's usually the point where they will have already to think about the next season, the following season, think about clubs who will go through the qualifiers for the Champions League and for the Europa League and those 3 rounds of qualifiers and the playoffs and all of that. So, of course, I think if UEFA have to think about extending that date, they will. If there's a possibility, for example, to play the remaining games in the Champions League and the Europa League in July, and it's possible with the domestic leagues as well, of course they will think about it. But I think right now the idea is if we can finish by June the 30th, that would be better for everyone else. And that's why it's the date that Ceferin and UEFA have put forward, because that would make so many things far easier if by then every European games could be finished. We could have played the Europa League final, we could have played the Champions League final. That would be ideal. But I think, considering the extreme situation at the moment and the circumstances, of course, UEFA will not be close to extending that date and looking into finishing the Champions League and the Europa League in July, maybe even in August or September for all we know. But I think in Ceferin's mind and people at UEFA's mind, it would be so much better if by June the 30th, everything could be done.
Meanwhile, Jules, of course, as I mentioned at the top, the Premier League clubs now are addressing how they're going to deal with non-playing staff. We saw Newcastle and Spurs putting them on furlough. People coming out and saying, hey, wait a minute, Barcelona are going to pay all their staff 100% thanks to the players. Why is that not being replicated in the Premier League?
Because the Premier League seems to have taken a different path, where instead of having each club deciding on what they do with their first-team squads or non-playing staff, like we saw with Juventus and Barcelona, Bayern Munich, other clubs through Europe, it looks like the Premier League will do it centrally. So the Premier League have a big meeting as well, a bit like UEFA one, but on Friday at lunchtime, where it will be discussed with all the 20 clubs in the Premier League what to do with players' wages. And I think the idea and the expectations for many clubs, including Newcastle and Spurs, is that a decision will be taken on Friday by the Premier League, agreed with all the clubs in the Premier League, that centrally it will be decided that all Premier League players will have their wages cut then. So it's not Arsenal and Manchester United and Manchester City and Liverpool all taking that decision by themselves. It's the Premier League saying, with everybody agreeing, let's have all our players in our league, all taking a 20%, 30%, 50%, whatever, 70% pay cut, and we all agree to it, and we all make it official on Friday. And then if clubs want to do the same for their non-playing staff, like Newcastle and Spurs have done, then so be it. They can do it to save more money, to make more cuts, to save more money because of the loss of earnings that they're suffering at the moment. But that's why Newcastle and Spurs have done it just for the non-playing staff, because they expect, I think, the Premier League to announce it on Friday or very soon for the whole Premier League clubs, all Premier League players to have that pay cut.
Julien Laurent, thank you very much. If you want more of Jules, and let's face it, who wouldn't? You can join in for the Gab and Jules podcast, the latest edition available now to download.
Well, that was the update on UEFA and the European Leagues Board, and now I'll be taking you on the updates on coronavirus across the globe.
The U.S. now has more than 100,000 COVID-19 cases. That's nearly 20,000 more new coronavirus patients than in Italy, which is the second worst affected country. On Friday, U.S. President Donald Trump signed into law a bill of more than $2 trillion, all aimed at helping struggling Americans and lessening the pandemic's impact on the economy. It's the biggest economic stimulus package the U.S. has seen in modern history. The death toll in Italy has now surpassed 10,000. Currently, this is the highest in any country. People are dying at such a rate that cemeteries have been struggling to keep up. Six critically ill COVID-19 patients in Italy will be taken to civilian hospitals in Germany. They arrived in the country on Saturday in what Germany's defense minister calls a sign of solidarity. Spain now has more than 70,000 cases of COVID-19, and the last 24 hours have marked a new high in the daily rise in fatalities. The country saw more than 800 deaths overnight, bringing the death toll to 5,690. Nursing homes across the country have been overwhelmed, and this skating rink in Madrid has been turned into a makeshift morgue to deal with the spike in fatalities. New Orleans is usually one of the busiest cities in the U.S., but today it's deserted. It's hard to believe this is what it looked like a month ago. when people celebrated Mardi Gras. Some experts are blaming Carnival for the spike in cases in the city. Nearly 60 people have died in New Orleans from COVID-19. Joshua Tree National Park in California seems like the perfect place for a housebound person looking to take a walk in nature. But the problem is, other people had the same idea. People continued to visit the park, even with signs around the area, telling people to keep their distance.
10 or 11 a.m., cars started parking on the road out here. And they probably parked, I would say there's at least a couple hundred cars parked half a mile all the way down the road. And people in large groups walking up the road to hike in the park. Obviously, the problem of that is people in close proximity kind of defeated the purpose.
Last weekend, the governor of California announced a soft closure of state parks, blocking access to them by car to discourage people from coming. California had more than 4,700 confirmed cases of the new coronavirus.
Updates on coronavirus across the globe, and let's keep praying because God still has a solution to everything, because this COVID-19 has to flush out of our country, has to flush out of the world, because God is still the solution and still remains the solution. So if you love this video, don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel. Follow me on Instagram, Facebook and Twitter. It's still your girl Naomi Shapra. Thank you and have a lovely Sunday.